all, welcome back to Drunk on Writing. I'm your host, Warren Pawlowski, and in this episode of the Stephen King Dissections, we're taking a look at the rather unique 1983 novella, Cycle of the Werewolf, which, well, to borrow from Stephen King's 1984 comments on the book, is a surprisingly thin read. Makes sense when you realize this book began its life as a calendar. Yeah. Before we get into that, though, if you're a Stephen King fan, be sure to head on over to and subscribe to youtube.com/drunkonwriting, where I've now just about covered the entirety of Stephen King's first decade as a writer. And I'm just getting started. If you don't like commercials in your videos, if you like to get your videos as soon as possible, become a Drunk on Writing patron to get early, ad-free access to every video and podcast, as well as exclusive behind-the-scenes videos and previews, an exclusive monthly podcast, exclusive wallpapers and scripts, and more. Check out the full slew of offerings at drunkonwriting.com. To all my patrons out there, including this episode's sponsors, my best friend Ariya North and my brother David, thank you for helping to make this episode and Drunk on Writing as a whole possible. Now, as you may assume, the origins of this book are rather interesting. As detailed by King, it began on Halloween weekend 1979, when Christopher Zaviza, founder and publisher of the Land of Entertainment, established to promote artist Bernie Wrightson, who, of course, illustrated the breathtaking visuals within Cycle of the Werewolf, approached an apparently drunk Stephen King at the World Fantasy Convention in Providence, Rhode Island, with a pitch: a 12-month calendar of Wrightson's original illustrations, each of which would be paired with an original vignette written by King. And King agreed to it. Again, he was apparently drunk and, as he says, while drunk, I would seriously consider a proposal that I buy the Brooklyn Bridge and have it moved to my backyard in Maine by U-Haul trailer. As an ode to Cycle of the Werewolf's unique beginnings, I think this calls for a toast and something of a throwback for Drunk on Writing to Stephen King and agreeing to do weird things. After being drawn to the phases of the moon, which he apologizes for playing so loosely with in the afterword, and subsequently the Cycle of the Werewolf, King became determined to knock one vignette off a day and finish in 12 days, and quickly wrote the first 3 installments, that is, of course, January through March. But faced with other projects, and almost immediately feeling the constraints of his self-imposed 500-word limit, this is, after all, the man who wrote The Stand, which, now that I mention it, Cycle of the Werewolf bears some, similarity to, well, at least its, so-called No Great Lost chapters. Those are fantastic chapters. Bears a lot of similarity to Salem's Lot, too, if we're going there, but let's hold off on that for just a moment. King lets the project languish until January 1981, when Zaviza follows up with him and, feeling a bit guilty about the delay and trying to, as he says, be a professional, bite the bullet, and finish the thing off, he takes those first 3 months with him on a family trip to Puerto Rico, completing the next 3 chapters by the time the family picks up their rental car. Except King wasn't exactly happy with his work. "If I'm going to be dead honest with you," he wrote, "I thought Cycle of the Werewolf was a stillbirth. The first 6 months had been like 6 yanks on the pull cord of a lawnmower that's got an empty gas tank. The vignette form was killing me. I felt like something that has been bent, folded, stapled, and mutilated. That is, until he started writing July, and about a kid named Marty. How he was burned because the werewolf had not been content with just killing people. The son of a bitch also went and got the fireworks canceled." Now, that's an interesting angle, isn't it? Something different, something personal, but not an inconsequential slight with unlimited consequences. "I was excited, almost feverish," King wrote about this revelation, "and what happens at the best of times happened then. I could see ahead of what I was writing to all the things I would write, and I can see backward to all the things I would fix up." So the vignettes, especially those toward the end, they got longer, and the calendar, well, it turned into a novella. King thinks that was the intention the entire time, by the way, and you've got to admire Zaviza's hustle here, as in lieu of a calendar that, might have been looked at as more of a collector's curiosity than anything else, the Land of Enchantment got what amounted to an original Stephen King book that also happened to be capped off with additional artwork from Wrightson. They made the most of this situation too, releasing Cycle of the Werewolf as an oversized, and perhaps, if you listen to King's opinion, overpriced, 9x12, 7,850 copy limited edition hardcover art book in 1983, including a signed deluxe edition of 350 copies, 100 of which featured original Wrightson werewolf sketches. 2 years later, in April 1985, though King hadn't originally intended for it to be reprinted, The Land of Enchantment partnered with New American Library to publish a trade paperback edition under the Signet imprint. That's one of the copies I have, and the one that I read for this dissection. Later that same year, in October to be precise, the same month the novella's adaptation, sporting the new title Silver Bullet, hit theaters, but we'll talk about that more next time, the book was released, again, as part of a just $1 more expensive, retitled tie-in edition. I bought that version as well so I could read, and of course quote here, King's, at that time, newly penned foreword detailing the novella's drunken origins, and, I suppose, his also included original screenplay for the adaptation, but again, we'll talk more about that next time. If you've read the book, and I really hope you have if you're watching this, you know that Cycle of the Werewolf didn't exactly abandon its calendar origins. Not only does the final narrative unfold across monthly incidents, each chapter is also given a rather elegant, if redundant, title treatment featuring the months of the year. I say redundant because, well, as was originally pitched, every month, every chapter is paired with Wrightson's art, and his black and white opening pieces also feature the months of the year. It's pretty easy to imagine these laid out as a calendar, especially with the, let's say, limited nature of some of King's entries. You can clearly see how he could have finished them so quickly, which really plays into my main takeaway from this book, from its story. It's just like King said. I mean, it's thin. I mean, literally, it's thin. Even after whatever revisions King made to the earlier narrative, it isn't until that July chapter, obviously halfway through the cycle and halfway through the book as well, that the plot starts to take shape and sink its teeth into you. Every chapter prior, though entertaining and at times horrifying, though mostly cleverly written with some nice use of the present tense to maximize the tension, still very much feeling like throwaway narratives you might expect to have on a calendar you wouldn't revisit. Anecdotes of isolated rail workers, lonely virgin seamstresses, kite-flying kids, and the like. But I will say, the first chapter, that one about the rail worker Arnie, what a name, by the way. What a weird name to reuse. Arnie? Come on. Okay. Sure. You got a lot of Arnies you're hanging out with, Stephen? That chapter has what I believe is my favorite line of the book. It springs with a snarl, and Arnie Westrom swings the pick. Once. It's just, without even seeing it happen, with just that simple one-word narrative turn, that's the end of him. Because, I mean, if it had worked, ain't no way he would have stopped swinging that thing. I know I wouldn't have. And even when the tale does start to present a narrative through line, one, like I said, wildly reminiscent of Salem's Lot. Small town infected by an unholy curse with a resourceful boy, an open-minded man, and a lapsed priest driving the action while sheriffs and abusive husbands played the parts of cannon fodder? Does that sound familiar or what? Even then, the novella plays out by the numbers. As a werewolf story, it goes pretty much exactly as you'd expect it to. Well, except for good old Deus Ex Machina, let's give a kid a box of illegal fireworks, and why not top it off with a gun and silver bullets while we're at it, Uncle Al, completing his summer holiday, and this is true, this is in the book, completing his summer holiday fireworks shenanigans and roaring away down the road in his Mercedes convertible while still apparently wearing his dripping bathing suit. Expected that even less than him handing Marty his gun. Still think I read it wrong, even though I went back through it several times. I mean, where were his clothes? It doesn't help that King relies on the tried and true and terribly frustrating trope of simply leaving who the werewolf, the beast, the full moon killer is out of the text, even when multiple characters recognize him across the story. The customer is one of his regulars, we're told, for instance, when walking in Chat and Shoe proprietor Alfie Knopfler's shoes. Although he rarely sees this customer later than 10 in the morning, and a page later, we get this perfectly normal thought. His customer, someone he sees every day, someone everyone in Tarker's Mills sees every day, is changing. Frustrating, yes. Yes. It becomes even more so as we're fed multiple teases playing up the mystery and the someone everyone knows fact. He could be anybody, Constable Neary tells us shortly before his face is ripped off. A teller at the bank, a gas jockey at one of those stations out on the town road, maybe even someone right here now. Which actually turns out to be pretty funny because the entire mystery, it's all for naught. After our main man, Marty, survives his attack by knocking out one of the beast's eyes with a pack of firecrackers, we're told if Constable Neary had chewed this over in his mind, and he hadn't, he would have laughed. Because in that hot, still August of 1984, there was only one townsperson sporting an eye patch, and it was simply impossible to think of that person, of all persons, being the killer. Neary would have believed his mother the killer before he would have believed that. Only one person. Only one possibility. Who could it be? All this buildup, all this purposeful omission comes to a head when Marty rejoins the narrative in October to go trick-or-treating with his dad. But just a few pages in, as the mystery is just about to unfold, a full-color Wrightson illustration, one of only 3 to not feature the werewolf, and the only one presenting a peaceful scene, mind you, out and out spoils the reveal a full page before it's disclosed in the text, which oddly continues on as if its secret is safe, as if we hadn't already seen the beast laid bare. At one point on Marty's tour, we're told directly opposite that illustration, the beast himself, now safely between its moon of insanity, has dropped candy into his bag, unaware that Marty's face has gone deadly pale under his Don Post Yoda mask, or that, beneath his gloves, his fingers are clutching his Yoda staff so tightly that his fingernails are white. The werewolf smiles at Marty and pats his rubber head. Could be tense. Could be exciting. If the eye patch sporting Reverend Lester Lowe of the Grace Baptist Church wasn't staring at us while we read it. Now, did Wrightson's illustration make me gasp when I saw it? It sure did. Was I surprised? Yeah. Would it have been nice to have the mystery revealed first within the story rather than its accompanying art so that passages like that one I just read still hold weight? You know it. Was I also fairly certain this formatting or printing mistake had been rectified in later editions? Very much so. In fact, it was the first thing I checked when I got this tie-in edition in the mail. I still can't believe it wasn't changed, honestly. But this leads to an important question. Which facet of the story is the true meat of the book? That actually might be the wrong word for this. I mean, there's meat to this book in just about the same way that there is to the posthumous Michael Crichton books. I mean, it's not there. So, which is the true heart of the book, and which the garnish, the supplement, the accompaniment? Remember, this was originally meant to promote Bernie Wrightson and his art, not Stephen King and his writing. I mean, think of a calendar, right? As you get the image up on top, writing would come secondary. You'd see that image first. And though this is the Stephen King Dissections series. This book is all Bernie Wrightson. From the wolfless thatch scratch, black and white mood settings to the full color scene interpretations and the chapter closing macro sketches, his art steals the show. It's almost like one of those turn of the century novels antique dealers would slice book plates out of. They'd then hawk for exorbitant prices, while the text, I don't know, maybe they use it for wall installation. My personal favorite piece here, the lone dead drifter featured in March, frozen in fear in the midst of an otherwise tranquil pass of snow, his stiffened eyes and hands drawing us toward an attacker long since departed, barely a hint of red around his neck, cluing us into his fate. It's perfectly haunting. Backing up a few paragraphs, though, I wonder just how surprising that reveal was to readers back in the 80s. There are surprisingly few contemporary reviews to be found, at least that have been digitized. Maybe that's a product of the limited run. And the turn in the film seems not nearly as well teased from the little I've read on it, so it's a bit unclear what the reactions to the text were. But nowadays, what with the seemingly rampant child molestation charges so often maybe swept under the rug, or at least indicated so by the media, it's almost a given that priests, ministers, and reverends depicted in any given media may be or are untrustworthy. So, while I was shocked, am I in the minority on that? I mean, clearly Marty and Uncle Al there were anything but surprised. I mean, Uncle Al convinces his friend Mac McCutcheon to make silver bullets out of a confirmation spoon, for Pete's sake. And Marty, I mean, not only does he have the chutzpah to send Reverend Lowe a note that says, "Why don't you kill yourself?" but when the time comes, he takes that werewolf out like a boss, even taking the time to deliver a final, soul-saving declaration as the beast leaps at him with a killing blow, saying, "Poor old Reverend Lowe, I'm gonna try to set you free." I mean, I don't know. The way I've described it here, the story sounds cool. And you know what? It is cool. It is fun. It is, as King says he hoped it would be when he agreed to the project, something small, something which will show he is a regular guy, and, drum roll and flourish of cornets please, not just in it for the money. Which may also explain what I've heard about Silver Bullet, Cycle of the Werewolves adaptation, which Stephen King also wrote, which I knew, but which I hear has a rocket wheelchair in it. Did I hear that correctly? And there's a crazed Gary Busey in it? What? I can't wait to watch this movie, which we'll be talking about in the next episode of Drunk on Writings, Stephen King Dissections. Until then, thank you for watching, thank you for listening, and as always, cheers, and keep on writing.